This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. What if comparing car insurance rates was as easy as putting on your favorite podcast? With Progressive, it is. Just visit the Progressive website to quote with all the coverages you want. You'll see Progressive's direct rate, then their tool will provide options from other companies so you can compare. All you need to do is choose the rate and coverage you like. Quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
We all have that friend who wakes up early to go get everyone McDonald's breakfast, while the rest of us sleep in. This is your sign to thank them. And if you're that friend, this is us saying thank you.
Just a friendly reminder that right now, get any size iced coffee before 11 a.m. for just 99 cents. And a satisfying sausage McMuffin with egg is just $2.79. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
I'm Stephen Metcalf, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest Dev Patel Goes John Wick edition. It's Wednesday, April 10th, 2024. On today's show, the actor Dev Patel makes his directorial debut with the feature film Monkey Man, in which he also stars. It's an action thriller about a young Fall Guy boxer seeking revenge for his murdered mother. We'll be joined for that segment by Slate's own Nitish Pahwa. And then Patricia Highsmith's gloriously sinister creation, Tom Ripley, fiction's most seductive, in my estimation, psychopath, makes his way to the screen. Yet again, it's not the first time by any means. This time, it's starring hot priest Andrew Scott as Ripley. It's in black and white. It's on Netflix, and it comes in 8 parts. And finally, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, she of, I hardly need to tell you who she is, but just in case, of Veep and Seinfeld fame, has a very well-beloved podcast in which she interviews a, quote, iconic older woman about her life, loves, careers, and achieving peace, self-satisfaction, career meaning, fill in the blank. And it's called Wiser Than Me, and its second season has just dropped, and we took the occasion to have a listen. But first, joining me today is Julia Turner, who is of the Annenberg School at USC of Journalism. Julia, how's it going?
Hello, Steve.
And, of course, Dana Stevens is the film critic for Slate.com. Hey, Dana.
Greetings. Hi, Stephen.
And Nitish, let me say hi to you because you're right across from me.
Hello.
Hey, great to have you back on the show.
Thank you so much. Great to be back.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one to talk about, so let's dig right in. All right. Dev Patel stars as Kid, a young man living in a very Mumbai-like city, though it's fictionalized in the movie. He's a pro fighter, a heel in a monkey mask. He's paid to take the fall and paid a little extra to bleed. Through a series of ruses, he works his way as a waiter into a secret brothel for the ultra-rich, coming ever closer to the man upon whom he wishes to take revenge, Rana Singh, the city's corrupt police chief, who, when the kid was a small boy, killed the kid's mother while stealing land from poor villagers. In the scene we're about to hear, Kid has finally wormed his way into the offices of the woman who manages the empire within which this brothel exists. And just to set it up, because you won't have a visual, at a key moment in the clip, he's going to show her as his CV the palms of his badly disfigured hands. Let's have a listen.
Take this.
I don't want charity. What I need is a job.
This is King's. We just don't hire off the street. Where's your references? Your CV? Look, I don't have time for all this. Ye paise lord jao.
There's my CV. That's bleach. Chemical, oil. Give me the job no one wants to do. I'll do it. This is all I know.
Anyone who talks outside these walls, anyone who forgets their place, doesn't turn out well for them. Understood?
Well, as I said up top, we're joined by Nitish Pahwa, who's, of course, a tech writer, editor for Slate. And Nitish, you have a great piece up on Slate now called Monkey Man Has a Bold New Vision. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Stephen.
We have a lot to cover here. The movie alone would be plenty to discuss. But first, the set of controversies that have surrounded it, this is, even to someone like me who's not overly versed in Indian politics, this is clearly a political statement of a film. It got it into trouble. Its release pathway was a nonlinear one, to put it mildly, and it may not even come out in India, or might, but Nitish, give us some background on that part of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So the movie finished filming back in 2021, and Netflix was originally supposed to distribute it, but they kind of put it on the back burner for a few years. I mean, Netflix has a very large Indian audience. It wants to maintain that audience, and it, more importantly, does not want to run afoul of the Indian government. And it often has shelved several projects, even from prominent directors like Anurag Kashyap, for that purpose. So no one heard about Monkey Man for a while. Then it seems like Jordan Peele's production company, Monkey Paw Productions, then picked it up. And they did a few edits, it seems, so as to try to stave off any further controversy. And while we still don't know the extent of what those edits were from the finished 2021 cut to now, it does seem like a little bit of symbology was changed in the background. They took some of like the colors, like representing the political party in the film, from saffron, which normally represents the Hindu nationalist parties, like Modi's ruling party in India right now. And they changed it to red, which tends to symbolize the communist parties who rule on a more local basis in India. And it seems they probably changed the city name so that it's not explicitly talking about Mumbai. You know, they made it a fictional Indian city, even though it's very clearly supposed to represent Mumbai, among other things. So they finally got this movie out, you know, in the US. It's gotten quite the reception here. But as of right now, there was a planned release date in India for April 19th, but from most recent reporting, it seems that the film censor board in India is still going over how exactly it wants to grade the movie and what changes it may want to make. And it may not end up releasing on April 19th, which coincidentally is the first day of India's general elections. They may push it back to April 26th, or we may not even hear about it at all. It seems that there's a lot of concerns over the violence. It is a very graphic movie. There's concerns over the representation of transgender characters in the film. And there's also concern, of course, over the Hindu symbology, which is a very core part of it.
Nitish, I wonder, because you wrote about this for Slate, if you could sort out a little bit what the Hindu symbology is in this movie, because I think it's somewhat muddled even for someone who is versed in the politics and religion of that region. I mean, for one thing, obviously, the main character, Monkey Man, right, is a version, I don't want to spoil too much about it, but I think even the trailer reveals that he is in some ways an avatar, an incarnation of Hanuman, the monkey god, right? So he himself is a Hindu symbol who seems to have this special relationship with his favorite god, Hanuman, right? But also the sort of Hindu nationalists who, as you said, have been sort of masked with a different flag color, et cetera, are the bad guys to some degree. There's a whole network of bad guys that involves organized crime and local police, and also this religious leader, right, who seems to be in bed with the corrupt power. So I feel like you could go in here with various attitudes toward Hinduism and Hindu nationalism and see what you want to see. There's even some disturbing moments when the kid is wrestling in the ring with his monkey mask and, you know, having these unexpected victories. And I wouldn't know this if I hadn't read you and other writers on it, but some of the things the crowd is chanting in favor of him have also been used as Hindu nationalist chants. So I know that's a lot of layers, but is it the case, as it seems to me, that the politics of this movie are muddled even without, you know, whatever censorship came along later to change it?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. There is definitely the way the film is structured. I think it's pretty clear, like, who the opposition party is supposed to be, even with changed colors and whatnot. You know, the Baba Shakti alliance with the police chief, Rana Singh, the spiritual advisor, and like the corrupt police chief. You know, that's a very common element in a lot of Hindu nationalist politics. You have the spiritual types who may be candidates themselves in office and often run up on platforms of Hindu supremacy, on Islamophobia, and even like caste supremacy, you know, praising Brahmins over anybody of a lower caste or any of a different class or creed. And so that element strikes me as pretty pointed. But yes, there are definitely some pretty mixed things about how Patel and everyone else goes about presenting it, as you pointed out. Like, I mean, the audience members at Patel's character's fights, they're booing Christians very loudly. That's also representative of the persecution of Christians in India that's been ongoing. They are also shouting these chants that have often been a staple of Hindu nationalist rallies.
And sometimes in favor of the hero. That's,
right,
I think, the part that startled me. Like, didn't we establish that the crowd are a bunch of, sort of like bigoted lunatics? Right.
Right. So the way they present in the movie, too, it seems like the spiritual leader, Baba Shakti, is very interested in land grabs, which, again, also very much a part of the Hindu nationalist landscape. You have a lot of like vigilantes from organizations like the RSS or Bajrang Dal who like go into villages like kids' childhood village that we see getting raided. They'll go in there, they'll try to either like convert certain tribal members or community members or like get them on a certain place, or they want to construct a temple of their own, or they're just clearing land for their own purposes. As alluded to early in the film, Baba Shakti is facing some controversy for wanting to build out a commune and displacing a bunch of people in the process. So it still seems clear to me who is the target, but I mean, the politics of Hindu nationalism are not ever limited to one party or one type, and it even varies among leaders at the local level. So this seems to be kind of a blanket statement going on here. And for the record, I mean, it's not that Hindu nationalists are only interested in grabbing more land. They very much believe in their ideologies, and they will do whatever they can to snuff others out.
Yeah, I mean, the context is so useful to have. The film is both dazzling and muddled to watch. I found myself both exhilarated by the parts of it that felt fresh and then sort of disappointed by the parts of it that don't cohere. Like, it's a mix of sophisticated and simplistic. And I think, the unusual thing it's doing is pairing like a very real and urgent and trenchant political critique, right, of Hindu nationalism and really of any kind of religious fundamentalism with a John Wick style revenge plot. And just vengeance as a plot is not the plot of the moral sophisticate, and yet the kind of framework is intending to be a moral critique. And the strange bedfellows of those two thrusts of the film, I think, never quite resolve. And it's a drag because there's so much about it that's like visually exciting and fun, and so many of the fights that are kind of interesting. And it's delightful to see Patel in this performance. I mean, I've always been a fan of his and the kind of elegance with which he uses his physicality in all of these different dreadful situations. There's one moment where he like reaches into a dumpster to get some rice for a dog that later becomes a gun mule in the plot. And he just looks it's so balletic. But, I mean, revenge is just like a boring plot and a simplistic plot. And yet the world that's being sketched is so complex, and the tension there never quite resolves. I mean, there are these flashback scenes of him with his beloved mother who has been killed and who teaches him the story of Hanuman and the kind of principles. And, she's the woman in the fridge, it's the classic trope. It's like, it's practically Tom Cruise under the sheets, like whispering to Michelle Monaghan. It's like these intense close-ups of the dead woman for whom the vengeance must be wrought. And it's like, just, I don't know. It's hard to reconcile. Did you guys struggle with that too?
Yeah, I don't think the flashbacks are well integrated in this movie at all. I mean, my main critique of this movie is Dev should have gotten somebody else to direct him. It's great that he's having a directorial debut, but I don't think directing yourself, especially in a huge role like this where you have all this, physical action and stuff to do, is not
And he's
not
doing
an easy thing.
a lot of his own stunts, apparently.
Which I mean, the camera goes out of its way to show you, but I just the action was not well filmed in this movie. I don't know about you guys, but I mean, having a handheld camera doesn't necessarily make something exciting, right? Like putting a camera in someone's hand and having them run through a fight scene doesn't make you feel like you're in the fight. It just kind of gives you nausea. There were some real missteps, I felt like, in the pacing and the directing of the action in particular. And in a movie with this much action, that's a real problem.
Yeah, I mean, how many different dimensions of filmmaking can you set the bar that high on, right? It's like making the transition to a full-on action star. What we've learned over the course of doing the show during the heyday of Marvel, Star Wars, like we see action sequence after action sequence, tons of movies in that sort of generic vein, is that it's not just the actors that are choreographed in a great fight scene, it's the camera and where the camera is and where you are as a viewer in relation to the action, where everybody is in a certain shot at a given moment, and how the fight itself fits into the flow of a larger plot or storyline. These things are artful in the highest degree, and Patel wasn't up to that part of it, so it is kind of muddled. Julia, I thought you made a brilliant point, which is that the urge to make a Wick-like revenge fantasy goes entirely in some ways against the urge to make a moral parable about not only Indian politics but demagogic politics in general. You know, where does bloodlust fit in with that? And I thought there was one really interesting moment. I don't want to spoil either movie, but you know, there's a moment in the movie which reminded me a little bit of Dune 2, where you think like there's really going to be a profoundly moral and deeply thought point about what bloodlust does to whip up crowds and get them behind you, and then how you use that and channel that. And it has to just let it go. I mean, there's this moment where the crowd's behind him finally, and you're like, oh, he can seize that moment. That's what a charismatic leader of either kind, corrupt or not corrupt, does. But nothing about the movie allows him to do that in some sense. He has to go forward as the lone wolf bent on revenge. So the movie is impressive, and I believe him as an action star, which is a very high bar, Nitish, right? It's like, and he doesn't, I wouldn't say he has the traditional physicality of a action star, but he's a remarkably balletic, athletic, and captivating looking young man, and you believe him when he's kicking the shit out of hordes of ne'er-do-wells. So I'd love to see him as an action hero. I just think maybe either he has to learn. 3, 2, 1. I just think maybe Dana's right. Like someone else maybe has to hold the camera.
The use of Hindu religious symbology in that sort of like single-minded revenge track has always made me nervous. I mean, that's a staple of a lot of like high-octane Bollywood films and very nationalist ones going back a while. And even recently, I mean, you could pinpoint RRR as an example of this. I thought it was interesting that he chose to take it in a direction against, you know, these types of antagonists. But at the same time, yeah, it ends up being this, you're still manifesting this sort of hyper-masculine identity that is so core to Hindu nationalist politics. The action was like fun, but I definitely agree on so much of the pacing and, you know, how the film actually reads as like a whole script.
I mean, I think I found myself really rooting for this movie despite its muddledness and kind of wanting it to be its most ambitious version of itself. And, you know, thinking about the opportunity cost of whatever Dev Patel's other path to an action star would have been. You know, he's spoken in interviews about how the roles he was offered in that kind of movie are like the hacker sidekick who can enter the mainframe, which I totally can see. But I could also imagine a world where he ended up in some Marvel movie that might have been unsuccessful in much less interesting ways. So I came away really admiring his ambition and desire to make something interesting and distinct and different. And even I'm a fan of his, but sort of even more excited to see what he might do or cook up next. And also hopeful that, you know, for all that he's a great performer and his physicality is interesting here, I actually think his strengths as an actor cut against, like, he has such a subtle and emotive capacity and such an empathetic capacity in his face that just the kind of ruined, soulless bloodletter whose you know, humanity has been extinguished by his pain. I'd love to see him. I'd love to see a slightly evolved motive for his balletic violence next time.
I know, the counterpoint, basically the human black lab known as Keanu Reeves. It's like totally unexpected and weird, but by the fourth installment, the whole world, was behind Wick. But absolutely point taken. I mean, Dev Patel's face is just to get lost in over the course of 2 hours. Nitish, thanks for coming on and discussing Monkey Man. And as always, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. I hope you come back soon.
Yeah. Thanks again. Always a pleasure to be here.
The new Starz series, Mary and George, starring Julianne Moore and Nicholas Galitzine, tells a story almost too outrageous to be true, but shockingly, it is. With next to nothing to her name and looking to elevate her social standing, Mary Villiers sets her handsome and charming son George on the path to seduce King James I and become his all-powerful lover. Trust me, you've never seen a mother-son duo like this before. This show is full of wit, scandal, action, and did I mention Julianne Moore? Something this audacious and sexy is as genre-bending as it gets. You won't be able to look away. Watch the season premiere of Mary and George now, only on Starz and the Starz app. Apple Card is the perfect cashback rewards credit card. You earn up to 3% daily cash on every purchase every day. That's 3% on all your favorite products at Apple, 2% on all other Apple Card with Apple Pay purchases, and 1% on anything you buy with your titanium Apple Card or virtual card number. Visit apple.co/card calculator to see how much you can earn. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Subject to credit approval. Terms apply.
All right, before we go any further, Dana, this is typically where we discuss business. What do we have this week?
We have but one thing, and that is to tell listeners about today's Slate Plus segment. This is a listener-inspired segment. It's really one of the best listener questions we've gotten in a while. Don't you agree? This question came to us from a listener named Gretel, who I think worded her question very well in such a way that it's really open-ended and I think can make for a good conversation. She wanted to know about ambition and our relationship to life ambition. How do you balance ambition and life contentment? Home life and work life. How important is it to you to achieve, status, the next big thing, climb the ladder? I'm especially interested to hear from Julia on this because she's in a transitional moment in her career and life. But it's just really a great question to ask anyone. I'd love to hear any of my friends on this. So we will discuss ambition versus contentment in today's Slate Plus segment. If you are a Slate Plus member, you will hear that at the end of this show. All right, on with the show.
Okay, Ripley.
Rip it up.
Let's rip it up. All right. Well, The Talented Mr. Ripley is the 1955 novel by Patricia Highsmith. It stands, in my estimation, as one of the true masterpieces of genre fiction. But I have to say, I think that's damning it with too faint praise. It is quite simply a literary masterpiece. It placed her in the ranks of Poe, Graham Greene, the upper reaches of our most sinister literati. Attempts to do justice to Ripley on the screen they've been a mixed success, in my opinion. Here's a list of the men who've tried to personify Ripley, the psychopath who kills his friend and steals his identity. Dennis Hopper, Alain, I butchered it, Alain Delon. Delon. Dana, that was beautiful. And John Malkovich and, of course, Matt Damon. Has anyone got it quite right? I mean, I hope to discuss that. Now we're treated to a multi-part Netflix series aiming, it seems to me, to capture the nauseatingly delicious essence of the Highsmith novel. This version stars Andrew Scott. You probably know him better, maybe know him better as Hot Priest, I don't know, as Tom Ripley, who is sent by a well-meaning and very rich father to Europe to return with his wayward son, the elegant dilettante Dickie Greenleaf, and things do not go quite as planned, I guess is one way of putting it. This version is in black and white. It co-stars Dakota Fanning and Johnny Flynn. In this clip, Ripley is now in Italy. He's retrieving the prodigal playboy and has decided to come clean to Dickie, which kicks off the unlikely friendship between the two of them.
I have a confession to make. Your father sent me here to try to convince you to go home.
My father?
Yeah. And I told him I'd try, and I meant it, but I have no intention of doing that now. I completely understand why you'd want to stay here. Why anyone would, it's perfect. Why would you want to go back to New York?
He sent you, like, paid your way?
Yeah, but I'm going to pay him back.
How do you even know him?
You don't. He found me. I guess he couldn't convince any of your real friends to interfere in your life. And I'm not going to either.
I can't believe he did this.
You're not upset with me?
No, of course not. I'd have done the same thing. I did the same thing. I saw the opportunity for adventure to an unknown place and took it. Exactly what you've done.
Yeah.
Julia, let me start with you. I'm curious, just to kick off, like what your history with this IP is. You know, have you read the Highsmith? You've seen, surely we talked about the Matt Damon film. What's your relationship to Ripley, and what do you make of this this turn on the material?
I've only seen the Matt Damon film, although I do know the woman who did the subtitling for the American release of Purple Noon, but I haven't seen it myself. So, and it was interesting to watch this series, which I gather is perhaps more interested in the parts of the Ripley story that really animate and elevate Patricia Highsmith's book, and it made me more curious about reading the book. I mean, my experience of the Matt Damon one, which we talked about, is like sumptuousness, right? The world is so gorgeous that he's trying to infiltrate, and the novelty of seeing Matt Damon play a creep when he usually doesn't play a creep was also part of what sustained that version for me. Whereas in this one, it's incredibly beautiful. And we should note the cinematography is striking. It's all in black and white, and it's an incredibly stark, heightened contrast, black and white, that highlights the beauty of post-war Italy and also does not at all make you feel like you want this guy's life. Like the whole thing seems bleached and dark, and it sent me back to the book, which we'll have to report back on. But like the fascination of the Matt Damon version is like, nothing at all like Succession, but akin to Succession. Like just let's wallow in gorgeousness and the twisted psyches it can let flower. Whereas this one seems to start with the twisted psyche and leave less room for the gorgeousness.
Yeah, it's a kind of almost a Herb Ritz, black and white contrast.
Well, the cinematographer is actually really worth noting. It's Robert Elswith, who's best known for working with Paul Thomas Anderson. Like he shot There Will Be Blood and a lot of Anderson's movies. But he's just a master of modeling.
Yeah.
He shot Michael Clayton. He shot George Clooney's Good Night and Good Luck, which is worth mentioning because it's also in that very rich black and white. And I thought the cinematography was dazzling in this show. I mean, it's not just I turned off the colors so it looks cool and old. It's like incredible attention to composition and texture.
Yes.
And, the crumbling walls of Rome. And it's
Very
just
much.
so beautifully evoked.
You could take any frame of this and hang it on your wall.
Dana, I don't want to break your flow. I can't wait to hear what you thought of it. Have you read the book?
No.
Oh, God. How, you guys, it's just the greatest, most delicious, weirdest thing in the whole world, and no one gets it right.
I believe possibly that the only Highsmith novel I've read is The Price of Salt, and I read that because Carol was based on it. I know it's not even at all one of her best known or best selling books. So yeah, my experience with Ripley is basically the Anthony Minghella movie, which I think is perfect for what it is. It's one of those movies that it really, what this show really showed me is that I do want to read the book because it's obvious that this book lends itself to all kinds of different interpretations. Because I think, as I said, that Minghella movie is basically a perfect sort of 2-hour adaptation, it's just a perfectly packed thriller, right? But this series is completely different, and I kind of also think it's perfect in its way. I'm on episode 6 now of this 8-episode show. I'm certainly going to finish it. In fact, it's probably going to be what I watch when I go home tonight because it's really seductive and hard to stop watching. And it's doing something completely different with the book. So that must mean that there's a lot in this book to play with.
This is, of the ones I've seen, and I'm almost a Ripley completist. And I began with the book, none of the film versions. And it truly is one of it's just a literary masterpiece. And it's just so, it's so queasy making. Highsmith herself had such a troubled, dark, cracked personality, and it just saturates that book, and she knew what she was up to. It's executed with total control. I should just say up front, I really appreciate this series. I'm enjoying it enormously, with one huge reservation, which I'll get to in a second. But one of the things it gets really right about the novel is there's a tremendous amount of walking up and down steps in the novel, and how far social distances are in very small, tight, ancient European places creates the atmosphere of it. And this took the time, having 8 episodes to play with, to try to get that right. This sort of labyrinthine, small existences of relatively minor European cities. It got me thinking, why have people gotten this wrong, this Ripley story wrong? And it occurs to me that Highsmith herself hints to you early on. She mentions in the book the Henry James novel, The Ambassadors, which is about an American going to retrieve a rich kid in Europe because he's been seduced by the decadence of Europe in the form of a lover, an older lover. And it's actually it's the only one of James's late novels that I really, truly admire, because he became so Baroque in his language. But it's a really wonderful, unforgettable book in some sense. And as in Portrait of a Lady, James is writing about kind of innocence of the New World and the decadence and evil of the Old World, though he complicates, of course, that. And Highsmith is doing the opposite, really. It's about America is essentially evil in some sense, and Europe is innocent. And what is Europe innocent of? It's innocent of the evil of Americans in some regard. And she's able to write it convincingly because she herself hovers so uncomfortably between being an American and being a European. And the flaw in most of the renderings is that someone either makes it too European, as in the René Clément film starring Alain Delon. It's very European. It's a wonderful film, and Delon in some ways is a wonderful Ripley. I mean, he's just an exquisitely beautiful one. And the interesting one to me is Wim Wenders with Hopper, because Hopper isn't really the lead character in some sense as Ripley. It's really Bruno Ganz, whose life he's infiltrating and destroying. Anyway, it's either made too European or way too American, as in the movie star driven one with Damon and Jude Law. There's some urge to bring all of that novel's really uneasy subtext fully to the surface. And I think this one is getting close. Here's my large reservation, and I want to hear you talk about it. They've made one very large, very distinctive change to the story. When one reads the book, one imagines them as young men, unformed young men. And there's something about Dickie as a certain kind of rich kid, unformed man. He's the dilettante who still thinks that if he just gives it enough time, he'll emerge as a talented painter. And of course, we and Ripley know that he has no talent. And Ripley's a young man in a recognizable sense. And this is important. He's a young man in a recognizable sense in that he doesn't know who he is or who he's going to be. His own background is inadequate to tell him. And out of that sort of lack of self-formation, there's this side to him that we don't relate to, which is the one who is essentially psychopathic and willing to steal another person's identity in order to suddenly become who he wants to be. And it's that combination that really works. And here, Andrew Scott, who's a wonderful actor, is 47 years old. The man is approaching 50 at best in this. And he's a wonderful actor and a wonderful looking man. At the very least, he's now playing Ripley as a man in his 40s. And yet he's got this boyish, ill-formed character. This is what he's been doing with his life for 20, 25 years, these little grifts and chisels that we see at the beginning of the thing. I do not understand. Help me out, Julia. I do not understand that choice. I find it very odd. It makes them totally unseductive.
I mean, speak for yourself.
Let me say that differently. No. Hold on. I don't want to say unseductive. I didn't mean it that way.
Okay. Dumb joke.
Yeah, no, I know. It just was, I walked into it. But you know what I mean, right? Like, it's not that they don't look sexy. It's not that the life that Dickie Greenleaf is leading is not sexy. I'm not being ageist in any way, shape, or form. I just mean at that juncture in life, it means something. It signifies something so different to be a rich man, dilettante, and a rich grifter, right? Like, I don't know, Julia, help me out.
It was not a stumbling block for me in the same way, although I saw that it was in various of the reviews I read, and it makes sense, and maybe it has to do with understanding the source material better. But I don't know. I mean, here's a stab at why it might work, which is kind of the creeping advance of adolescence, right? Like nobody ever grows up anymore. And, our 70-something likely Republican presidential candidate is infantile man-child. Like maturity. I mean, I guess we'll get to this when we get to our Julia Louis-Dreyfus podcast. Perhaps maturity does exist, but I don't know if it's necessarily so tied to physical age. It did not stumble for me, but perhaps that's also because I'm in my mid-40s and, so these people look young to me in the manner of one's strange optical lens. Yeah, I don't know. I could totally see what you mean. I mean, the kind of sumptuous beauty and naivete of the performances in the Minghella film showcase how well it can work when they are young, but the kind of dissipation of the airlessness of both of their middle ages, the grifty one and the sort of shiftless dilettante one, added its own tenor to me.
Yeah, I think I accepted it as a convention somehow just because it was a small price to pay for getting to watch Andrew Scott act.
Yeah, totally
and
fair.
I mean, I don't know if either of you, I think neither of you saw All of Us Strangers, the Andrew Hay movie from last year that Andrew Scott was in. Just that in a triptych with Fleabag, in which he plays, as you referenced, the hot priest, and this just show that Andrew Scott is an incredible magician. Because in all three of those projects, sort of in Fleabag, I see him, oh, of course, yes, he's a heterosexual Irish priest, right, who Phoebe Waller-Bridge is in love with. Then you see him in the Andrew Hay movie, All of Us Strangers. Oh, of course, he's a lonely, gay, middle-aged man living in a high-rise in London. And then we see him in this. Oh, of course, he's an American grifter who, is living off his rich friend. He just has this, he's so perfect for Ripley because he has this infiltrating, serpentine kind of quality, right, where he can be what you need him to be as an actor and as the character he's playing. And he has such a heavy burden to carry in this show. I mean, he's very, very often alone on screen, right? There's no dialogue. He's solving big problems of body disposal, one of which late in the series becomes completely comic while also being horrifying, right? And he both is unflappable and just almost always seems on the verge of just losing it. He seems incredibly insecure, but also unbelievably confident in his grifting abilities. And it's just so much to get across. And Andrew Scott just does it magically well. I have to say also, the way that queerness is kind of Trojan horsed into this show is really fascinating. And I respected that at this moment in the 21st century where many projects kind of feel that they have to wear their politics on their sleeves, that this movie is about what it is to be a closeted queer person in mid-century America and Europe without foregrounding that,
And that is utterly true to the source material. That was Highsmith's attitude to the material and towards, as I understand it, her own sexuality, views Carol, example after example. Okay, it's The Talented Mr. Ripley based on the Patricia Highsmith novel. It's an 8-parter on Netflix. I think we're in favor of this production and enjoying it. So check it out and let us know what you think.
The new Starz series, Mary and George, starring Julianne Moore and Nicholas Galitzine, tells a story almost too outrageous to be true, but shockingly, it is. With next to nothing to her name and looking to elevate her social standing, Mary Villiers sets her handsome and charming son George on the path to seduce King James I and become his all-powerful lover. Trust me, you've never seen a mother-son duo like this before. This show is full of wit, scandal, action, and did I mention Julianne Moore? Something this audacious and sexy is as genre-bending as it gets. You won't be able to look away. Watch the season premiere of Mary and George now, only on Starz and the Starz app.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $750 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So, just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
Julia Louis-Dreyfus made her name as a cast member of SNL. Of course, Elaine Benes, iconically on Seinfeld. Her extraordinary career continued with the more recent triumph of Veep. She also hosts a podcast in which she interviews iconic older women, to use the language of the podcast itself. Some examples are Sally Field, Bonnie Raitt, Carol Burnett, Rhea Perlman. It's now on season 2. People really dig it. We thought we'd give it a listen and discuss. In the clip we're about to hear, there's some banter between Louis-Dreyfus and her guest, the singer Bonnie Raitt. Let's listen.
When you see yourself, do you cringe when you see early footage of yourself?
I don't like it. I got to tell you, Bonnie. I don't like it.
Yeah.
I really don't. I mean, there are a few exceptions, but I'm pretty judgy about it.
Oh,
and
yep. I have a lot of that too. I know exactly what you mean. And here's the thing that I found out.
Yes.
How about when you think you're making a cool looking face at the camera?
Oh, please.
And you see the results and you look like you're just trying to go to the bathroom.
You look like such a dumbass. I know. And it's funny you say that because somebody posted something of me on Instagram or somewhere. And it was, anyway, it was some red carpet event. And I had gotten it in my head that I smile too much on the red carpet.
I'm right with you where you're going with this.
And so I'm standing there and I'm sort of looking over my shoulder and sort of like a slightly open mouth and I'm not smiling. And I look like I'm comatose in the picture.
Let's start with you, Dana. Julia Louis-Dreyfus with a podcast wouldn't have occurred to you maybe, but then it's like peanut butter and chocolate, two great tastes that go great together. Maybe.
For me, it was. I don't know about you guys. I mean, I think a celebrity-hosted podcast is a celebrity-hosted interview podcast, right? Where a celebrity talks to other celebrities is very dicey. You know, you see that in the many, many formats, right? Where one celebrity interviews another. It all depends on the mix. And they're both presumably people with large egos and certainly with big stories to tell, right? And you don't want to overshadow your own interviewee. So there are a lot of ways that this could have gone wrong, but at least for the episodes that I've listened to. And I started off with the last episode of the last season, which is Carol Burnett. I recommend that as your starter pack Julia Louis-Dreyfus podcast episode if you want to start with one. And also the first two in this new season, which have been with Sally Field and Bonnie Raitt. All three of those have been absolutely great conversations. You could argue if you wanted to find a nit to pick about this podcast, it could maybe be edited down to 1 hour. But actually, the digressions are some of the funnest part. There's a moment in her conversation with, I believe it's Carol Burnett, where they're talking about Wordle and how they both play Wordle every day. And Julia Louis-Dreyfus starts asking, what's your Wordle strategy? And what are some of your words, your standard words that you start off with? And at some point in the conversation, she says, and we're so off topic, this is probably going to get cut out, but it didn't get cut out. You could say that makes the editor look lazy, but if they had not left in that digression, we wouldn't know that Carol Burnett has a Wordle group, a Wordle texting group with Charlize Theron and Allison Janney, which Julia Louis-Dreyfus wants to get in on. I mean, all I can say is it really does feel like Coffee Clutch with Elaine Benes, and who would not want that?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly get a sense of the relationship between Julia Louis-Dreyfus, the person, and Elaine Benes, which she goes into a little bit at one point.
Well, she even has a verbal tick where somebody will tell an incredible story and she'll say, stop it, which remind me of Get Out.
Yeah, Get Out. But she also says at one point to Gina McCarthy, the EPA official who she has on to talk about Flynn, get the fuck out. And I was like, that's just Elaine Benes on roids. Julia, what about you?
This is a great podcast, and you should listen to it. I think that I suffered from celebrity podcast prejudice of like, well, a celebrity podcast is a slight vanity project, and they're like trading on the fame of the person, and how good's it going to be? So I just hadn't checked it out, despite being like an enormous fan of Julia Louis-Dreyfus and her work, ranging from her more dramatic film performances to her amazing comedic turns. So I like her. And I also, the subject of aging and paying attention to women over 60 and what lessons one might be able to learn from women in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, also totally plausible, interesting topic. But what struck me about it is how revealing the conversations end up being. And it has some of the problems of the celebrity podcast, where it's only, of course, revealing of the things that people feel comfortable revealing. But it's actually quite unusual to hear interviews, the purpose of which are, how should I live? Like the thrust of these interviews is not, tell me about your new book and what was it like writing nonfiction instead of fiction this time, and how did you feel about filming in Croatia? Like the question is like, it's about wisdom, right? It's explicitly supposed to be about what wisdom have you accrued in your decades of life and impart it to me and our listeners. So the framework is inherently closer to the core of human existence. And even though they don't always get there, they often do. And then there's often a lot of funny asides. It was just fantastic listening. I've been mainlining it since we picked this topic last week. I think I've listened to almost every episode now. And there are some in which she's a surprisingly great interviewer. I mean, interviewing someone live on mic is hard to do because and I think actually kind of her sense of comedic timing and seizing the moment maybe help her in it, because it's one thing to interview people for a print story because you can kind of like blather on and take forever to figure out what what you're trying to understand out of what they know. But doing it on mic in that performative way is tough. And she sometimes just goes right for the jugular, or she stops and she'll ask the question that was on your mind, or press in a way that not all celebrity interviewers are very good at. She doesn't always. Sometimes she in her interview with Sally Field, it's a good conversation. And one of the shticks of the show is that she then calls her mom after each interview to recap it with her. And those little interludes are charming and allow Dreyfus to kind of reveal some of the evolution of her own life and thinking. But she ended up explaining Sally Field's life story to her mom. And I was like, oh, I didn't know any of that about Sally Field. Maybe that could have come up sooner in the pod. But often she'll get right to the heart of it. And, she's kind of great. She also addresses all the subjects by their first name. She'll be like, oh, Sally, tell me about this or that. And it's very disarming. And it seems to disarm the subjects. I don't know, man. I went in ready to be skeptical and came out delighted.
She does so much preparation too. She really seems to have read their memoirs, watched as many of their movies, shows, whatever, as she possibly can. She really goes in with armed with a lot of specific questions. So it is true, Julia. And again, it could be more professionally framed. Like, here is Sally Field's life story. We will revisit parts of it in our conversation. Instead, secrets and things emerge in the course of the conversation, which is, of course, more like how a natural conversation goes. But, it doesn't always necessarily offload the important information at the top.
Yeah, we should say it's produced by Lemonada, which is, as Louis-Dreyfus says, is a woman-owned, woman-managed, substantially woman-run podcasting platform. It's beautifully produced. I agree with both of you. It's clearly pervaded with intelligence and care. The research is done. Julia Louis-Dreyfus is blowing me away as much as anything. Is how funny, nuanced, genuinely interesting and engaging her rather extended monologue intro to the episodes is. And the two episodes that I listened to, which ended up taking two and a half delightful hours to do, which is why I didn't get to a third, but I intend to keep listening, both moved through her own biography in ways that were self-reflective and interesting. They kind of she's perfectly poised to do this. She's saying, I'm self-reflective about who I am and how I got there. That involves more than my CV and a series of showbiz triumphs. I'm an actual human being with thoughts and feelings, but I'm also not done yet. And therefore, these women tend to be older than she is, and they have something that she doesn't have. It honors age in a way that American society doesn't typically do. Julia, you made, to my mind, a really incredibly perceptive comment in the Ripley segment about how people in America don't grow up. I mean, many of the dominant figures in America are immature boys who also happen to be, sexagenarians, septuagenarians, and octogenarians, Trump being only the most obvious. The maturity has a totally different meaning now in this era, in that no one seems to do it, at least in any traditionally recognizable way. And so to have an entire podcast devoted to the virtues of wisdom, it's not sententious. And think about how celebrity can play into the worst aspects of wisdom, i.e. turning it into pseudo-wisdom, i.e. how did you achieve such enormous self-satisfaction? Please tell me, what are the keys to me being 80 and totally, utterly self-satisfied? This doesn't do that. And then at the end of the day, you can set everything up and put the host in the chair and the guest in the chair, and it falls dead onto the floor. And that just doesn't happen. She's so lively and in the moment and funny and smart and likable. And she brings out that side to these guests. It sounds like a real conversation. And just very quickly, the second one that I listened to was the Sally Field episode. It was so marvelous. I didn't think I wanted to hear Sally Field talk about herself for an hour. I was totally wrong. And right up top, it starts with this description of all that Sally Field did. And you kind of don't think about it or remember, but what an astonishing career arc, and how it would sort of take a detour or sag or flag and then suddenly another triumph. I'm blown away. It really is, in some sense, almost like the perfect podcast. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about the other celebrity podcasts I listen to, and also about our kind of recurring conversations about the celebrity-produced documentaries and how celebrities are learning kind of the trade of nonfiction entertainment, and figuring out how to be vulnerable and how to produce things where they're not made too uncomfortable by pesky journalists and their pesky questions, but also manage to actually share and reveal and connect in ways that are satisfying to an audience. And I don't listen to a ton of the celebrity hosted pods. I mean, I guess Marc Maron is at this point, he's more of an interviewer than a comic and actor, but he's still obviously a comic and actor. And the thrill of that pod from the beginning was the sense of the practitioner interview rather than the journalist interview. So maybe he's the OG. But I do listen sometimes to Conan's podcast and sometimes to the Smartless guys. And I understand the appeal of both. Conan, I think, can be it's certainly an entertaining conversation. It's not always a penetrating interview. The Smartless guys, I get why that's a fun show to listen to because the shtick is fun, but they are dreadful interviewers. They never get anywhere with the subjects. It's all just like bits and chit chat. And again, it's a perfectly amicable hour, but the depth of these conversations and the vulnerability within them and the novelty of them and just the smart framing. I agree that the intro monologues are really well written and conceived and performed. The conversations are penetrating, and the little codas with her mom are revealing in and of themselves. I mean, I don't know that I'd put me and my mom on that's very vulnerable to have you chit-chatting with your mom. There's a moment where they talk about going gray, and they talk about when her mom went gray, and then Julia Louis-Dreyfus says, well, you could always go back. And it's a slightly fraught moment, because the mom's like, what the fuck? I don't want to go. She doesn't say anything, but you can kind of hear a little mother-daughter frisson in the moment of that wasn't quite the right thing to say, actually. And the mom's like, well, I can't really imagine ever going backward. And then she's like, oh, you look amazing, good gray. But just that's like a raw little nugget. And there it is. It's, it also points up, I think, how poor coverage of podcasting is. Obviously, there were some pieces about this when it first came out, the first season last year. It was at the top of Apple Podcasts for a while, so it has an audience. But having spent a lot of time with this show now over the last weekend, I'm like, but why aren't people shouting this from the rooftops? This is like a great product. It's a really well-conceived, well-structured, well-executed, novel, exciting, interesting media property that's not gotten the attention it deserves.
Totally agree, Julia. I had just one more thing to say about the age angle of the podcast. It's just, it makes such a huge difference. And as somebody who's younger than Julia Louis-Dreyfus, but not that much younger, it's very inspiring to me that she is taking the position of this younger person who wants to learn from older women when she's 62, and obviously in the eyes of the entertainment media, right? Being 62 is already, the venerable Julia Louis-Dreyfus. The idea that there's a third chapter, a fourth chapter, that's something that, as somebody who is approaching the third, I guess, or I don't know how many chapters there are going to be, it makes life feel longer that there's somebody who's 62 who's still saying, wait, I don't really know how to do this getting older thing. You, wiser person, tell me.
It really is extraordinary. It's called Wiser Than Me. It's the Julia Louis-Dreyfus podcast. Is out on all the platforms. We really think you should check it out. I'd give anything to do the male version of this podcast. Anything. I'm 60. I would love to just make a list of people 5 to 30 years older than me that I want to interview. But good fucking luck. I wasn't a star of Seinfeld.
Yes, Country for Old Men with Stephen Metcalf.
Yes.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you're driving, cooking, or doing laundry, Progressive knows the podcasts you listen to go best when they're bundled with another activity, much like how their Progressive home and auto policies go best when they're bundled. Having these two policies together makes taking care of your insurance easier and could help you save too. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. That's a whole lot of savings and protection for your favorite podcast listening activities, like going on a road trip, cooking dinner, and even hitting the gym. Yep, your home and your car are even easier to protect when you bundle your insurance together. Find your perfect combo. Get a home and car insurance quote at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
All right. Well, now is the moment in our podcast when we endorse Dana.
Steve, I'm going to endorse something I've not yet watched, but if it is not brilliant, I will hurl myself off a parapet.
Don't do that. It's very high stakes suddenly.
I thought of a parapet because the thing that I want to endorse is about a certain Danish prince we all know and love, Hamlet. Andrew Scott played Hamlet in 2018 in London, I believe. In my mind, it's a somewhat legendary performance. I remember when Fleabag came out and people were talking about him, that there was this, but his Hamlet, right? And I remember looking for it online at the time, in filmed play, bootleg version, not being able to find it. And since we were just talking about Andrew Scott, I thought, what about that Andrew Scott Hamlet? I wonder if it's up anywhere. And when we were taking a break from taping, you and I, Steve, watched some of the To Be or Not to Be speech, which he had a really, really interesting set of choices in.
Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them.
And so I just Googled it again, and you can watch the entire play on YouTube. And I have just discovered that, I don't know, in the last 15 minutes. So there's a 3-hour and 11-minute version of Hamlet on YouTube. We'll put a link on the show page, and it looks like it's pretty decent quality. It is a filmed play, so, it may be the stationary camera on a proscenium stage kind of deal. But yeah, getting to see this, especially, as I was mentioning, sort of chameleonic and, to me, just impossible to stop locking your eyes upon actor take on a character like Hamlet. I cannot wait.
Yeah, after watching the 30-second clip that you and I squeezed in a moment ago, I cannot wait. I'd never seen To Be or Not to Be interpreted that way. It was totally captivating. Julia, what do you have?
I just read one of those books that changes the way you think about everything, and I encourage others to read it. It is called Worn by Sophie Tannhauser. The subtitle is A People's History of Clothing. And it is a tight book, but conceptually sprawling. It's like a pan-human history of the fabrics we have used to clothe ourselves and of fabric itself as a technology that enabled the spread of humans to colder climes. It's divided into 5 chapters: linen, cotton, silk, synthetics, and wool, and tells an absolutely horrifying story about the centrality of the production of textile to the development of all kinds of terrible systems, economic and otherwise. And it's just great. Like the curiosity, the wisdom, the restraint, the craft of it. It is a beautiful, fascinating book. It's not like a sprightly romp. It's kind of a serious book, but it's great. I just strongly recommend it. And I got to shout out our friends at Blackbird Spy Plane, who've mentioned it a couple times in their newsletters over the last year. They had tipped it onto my reading radar, but I picked it up on my recent travels, and I just know so much more about how fabric is made. And I also love that, that she comes at it as someone who loves clothes. And there is a lot that you learn in this that will make you feel like you should never buy a piece of clothing again because of all of the exploitation and degradation that go into the making of fabric and have for centuries. But it's not a scolding book that tells you to never buy clothes. It's like a book that tries to explore all of the relationships that we have. It's so big and yet so effective. It doesn't feel like it should work at all, but it totally does. It's called Worn by Sophie Tenhauser.
Oh, wow. And that is a classic example of once you just hear the précis of it, you slap your forehead and are like, why didn't that book exist already? All right, before I endorse Julia, you and I had a totally unconscious moment of endorsement kismet.
Yes.
You endorsed The Fraud, the Zadie Smith novel, historical novel, and I endorsed the historical novel, The Blue Flower by Penelope Fitzgerald. Neither one of us knew until a listener emailed us that Zadie Smith, in a recent interview, I think with The Times, said, I had never thought about or wanted to write a historical novel until I read The Blue Flower by Penelope Fitzgerald. Kaboom.
So wild.
And it is kind of nutty. But anyway, that's just a little callback. My actual endorsement is this really wonderful essay. It's just incredibly fun and informative essay on the National Endowment for the Humanities website. And it tells a story that I'm amazed I didn't really know. So my way into poetry as a callow, young, ill-formed man who might have taken the Ripley path, but instead found a copy of Anne Sexton's complete poems. And Sexton is just for me, was somehow an easy way in. She's an utterly conversational poet. She's obviously one of the foundational confessional poets in the canon. And she speaks to that part of any human being who feels malformed or incomplete, radically malformed or incomplete, and worries about that because that was her whole actual persona as a human being, or her actual struggle as a human being and her persona as a poet. And it was through that I got into like Robert Lowell and other confessional poets and Plath and on. Whatever the rest, unfortunately, is not history, but it's my personal history. And it turns out that in the winter of 1959, Robert Lowell was a visiting professor at Boston University and taught a poetry seminar, that was attended by Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton. They were all in the room together, this is like when you found out that Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, and Michael Jordan would all be on the same Olympics basketball team, at least to me. And it's all about how Lowell, who was their senior and, kind of the bearer of the burden of continuing not only American poetry, but poetry in English, right, into a new era, and had just done so by publishing Life Studies, the groundbreaking work of confessional poetry that turned it into a hugely important and influential literary movement, was teaching the seminar to fucking Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton. And the essay just goes on to like why that's important and interesting. It's not in this, it's like much more about these personalities and how they were interacting with one another. It is so delightfully written and fun, but without being glib, right? I mean, each was a very, very deeply tormented human being, but what it meant for the three of them to be in that room together. And it was a very small seminar. And I just want to read one bit because it just conveys sort of what you're reading. During the weeks of the seminar that spring, Plath and Sexton, joined by a fellow poet, George Starbuck, a Yale Younger Poets Prize winner who had unjustifiably, in Plath's view and now in history's view, I mean, unequivocally, beaten her out for the prize, the Yale Younger Poet Prize, would head afterward to the Ritz, where they parked in the hotel's loading zone while enjoying their regular 3-martini gatherings. Sexton would quip that it made sense to park in the loading zone since they were all there to get loaded. I don't know, man. It's just, to me, this is just utter catnip. I love the piece. We'll link to it. It's by Steve Moyer. It's called Lowell, Plath, and Sexton in the Same Room. And why has no one written a big book about this? Maybe Steve Moyer's in the process of it. I hope so. Julia, thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Dana. That was fun.
Good show, Steve.
Very. You'll find links to some of the things we talked about today at our show page. That's slate.com/culturefest, and you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. The introductory music to our show is by the composer Nicholas Patel. Our production assistant is Kat Hong. Our producer is Jared Downing. For Dana Stevens and Julia Turner, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon.
The new Starz series Mary and George, starring Julianne Moore and Nicholas Galitzine, tells a story almost too outrageous to be true, but shockingly, it is. With next to nothing to her name and looking to elevate her social standing, Mary Villiers sets her handsome and charming son George on the path to seduce King James I and become his all-powerful lover. The show is full of wit, scandal, action. You won't be able to look away. Watch the season premiere of Mary and George now, only on Starz and the Starz app.
When we made our McDonald's Spicy Chicken McNuggets, you were praise hands emoji. Then we ran out, and you were streaming tears emoji. Now they're back, so you can be grinning face with sweat emoji. Order ahead on the McDonald's app.
And get money mouth face emoji with 2 orders of crispy, irresistible 10-piece McNuggets, spicy or classic, for just $6. Limited time only. Prices and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Single item at regular price.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.